It was even more empty, I think, because are there more chairs today? I don't know what it is. Clerk, we'll go ahead and get started. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Agents.
Here.
Legg.
Here.
Halliburton.
Here.
Sanchez.
Here.
Willetts.
Here.
Whittings. 5 present, 1 absent.
Thanks. All right. So we're going to start with Rebecca Hupp, Director of the Airport, and what she tells me is a very exciting presentation on a consolidated car rental facility. I don't think the mic's on, actually.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. Well, yes, you might question my judgment in what I consider to be fun and interesting, but to me, this is fascinating. We're going to talk this afternoon about our consolidated rental car facility. And I'm bringing this to council because it is the next step in our BOI upgrade program that we're about to embark on. We have done substantial amount of work on design. It'll be coming to the design review committee. And so I wanted to offer city council members an opportunity to offer comments and input as to our progress to date. So that's why we're here. Just as a very brief refresh, these are the major components of our BOI upgrade program. The East Public Garage and the Employee Parking Garage are currently in progress, as well as our checkpoint expansion are currently in progress. And then this CONRAC, the Consolidated Rental Car Facility, will be the next phase, which will make room for that Concourse A expansion. So that's just to put it in context for you. Here is a diagram outlining a little bit more detail what this will look like in terms of location. So we have the existing rental car facility right when you walk up the doorway there, the existing public parking garage, which is on the bottom right. And then the phase 1 ready return staging area will be where previously we had the Idaho Aeronautical hangar. And this will actually be a 2-phase project, which is a change from our airport master plan, but I'll talk about that in a minute. So when we first presented this to the rental car companies, they said, this is lovely. We love this location, but it's not going to be quite big enough. So we need to not only do phase 1, but we also need to do phase 2. And through a series of meetings with our stakeholders, the rental car companies, they notified us that what they would really like to do is do a phase 1, which is what we're calling the ready return. So where people will be able to pick up and drop off their rental cars. That will be phase 1. And then we'll actually do a second phase planned on an adjacent lot, probably in 2027. And this will be the quick turn area. So this will be where they fuel, where they wash cars, where they clean them out. And they will be consolidated. And then the garages will be connected by ramps. This is a rendering of what the building will look like. This is as you are approaching the upper roadway. The vehicle there in the diagram is, or in the rendering is actually on the upper roadway as it approaches the terminal building. So the rental cars will go the exact same way that they do now. As you recall, when you approach the airport, when you come to that fork, if you go left, you're going to arrivals and departures. And if you go to the right, you go and drop off your rental car. So that's that approach. So this is what phase 1 will look like. It'll be over 600,000 square feet, over 1,000, almost 1,100 stalls. And then there'll be staging for 297 cars on the roof. So those will be stacked on the roof. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this will be going to design review later this month. These are just some artist renderings of what this will look like. This is the walkway that will connect the terminal to the rental car facility. This is what we envision the landscaping looking like outside of that walkway. And this walkway will be completely enclosed and climate controlled. This is another view of the rendering. And you can see that we've identified a location for art. Again, this is as you approach the terminal and sort of that decision point where people either bear to the left or bear to the right. The right will take them to the rental car facility, and then that left or straight ahead will be arrivals and departures. This is a view from the opposite angle. This would be if you were returning your rental car. This would be on the west facing towards the airport, looking east. And then this is another aerial view from that same angle. It shows again the entry, the exit, the quick turnaround area, and then the ramps. This is a different view, but this shows the view from basically from the airfield side. Just a few project details for you. We have gone through the design process and we used local company HDR along with a nationally recognized firm, DiMattei Wong, that has built a number of these all over the country. McIlvaine Companies partnered with a group called Austin Commercial, who has built a number of these consolidated rental car facilities across the country. We're using a construction manager at risk methodology to build this, and we expect that we'll break ground in spring of 23. The budget is $66 million, and we hope to have it completed by mid-2025. I should note that we'll be issuing bonds for this. I think that's probably on my next slide, so I'm probably skipping ahead. So that's phase one. And then the phase two that I mentioned is the staging area for an additional 166 cars and stacking for 144. And again, this is for that quick turn, cleaning, fueling, washing, vacuuming. We expect construction on this would begin in 27 because we do have a current lease on this existing site that extends to 2027, and that will be about $29 million in phase two. The funding for this, the initial phase, we're actually funding with cash on hand, and it's generated through the customer facility charge, the CFC. You've probably heard us talk about that. We'll be refining the budget and begin the acquisition of the long lead time items, things like, for example, elevators, and perhaps some steel. We'll issue revenue bonds. The bonds will be backed by that customer facility charge that I mentioned. And we'll do that probably in spring of 2023. The CFC in Boise today is $6 per contract day, and that's pretty standard for airports of our size to have a CFC and to build a facility like this backed with those. So with that, I wanted to give the council an opportunity to weigh in and offer comments and ask questions.
Yes, go ahead.
Rebecca, thank you. Just a comment. I think this is really exciting. I know that folks have been enduring a lot of construction at the airport, but it's all going to be worth it. And it's just another indication about the growth that's happening and that we're becoming just a bigger airport. And thanks for your vision.
Well, thank you. And I should note that this is really going to be a great customer service amenity. As you know, many airports, you have to actually take a shuttle to get a rental car. And not only is that not a pleasant experience, but it's also not very environmentally friendly to be running shuttles back and forth. So we will not be doing that in Boise. So we'll be improving the customer experience for our passengers, but also keeping in mind that we want to be as environmentally friendly as possible. I should also note, and I didn't mention it in this because we're really talking about the concept, but this garage will be equipped with the infrastructure that as the rental companies bring their electric fleets online, it will have the infrastructure in place so that they can add the electric to their spaces to offer those electric vehicles.
Madam Mayor, thank you. Two quick questions. So will the bonds be issued all at once or will they be issued in phases with the phasing?
They will be issued in two separate phases, yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. Just wanted to make sure that I was noting that correctly. This seems like a lot of space. You've noted that we go through a lot of rental cars. Do we have a plan if we continue to grow for a staging area for rental car companies if we need it outside of this site?
So in our master plan many years ago, we identified some area off of Orchard Street as a future car rental location for when we outgrow this space. I suspect the car rental companies will want to stay in this location as long as they possibly can. And again, in our master plan, we identified one garage, and then the car rental companies have actually asked us to expand it to 2 to make sure that we have the longevity that we need to accommodate the growth that we're seeing.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Rebecca, it looks like that's it. Thank you.
All right.
Very
Thank
much.
you.
Okay, and next up, we've got Tim Keene to go over an update of the zoning code rewrite. And the zoning code rewrite team, welcome.
Mayor and council, can you hear me? Yes.
I don't
Thank-
know that the mic is on. I can hear you, but it's not very loud.
Thank you for giving me this chance to update you on where we are with the zoning code rewrite. Let me go to the next slide. So going back to the beginning of the process, it started in the fall of 2020. As you know, we've been through what are called modules 1 and 2, which deal with the base zoning, basically the zoning map of the city in module 1, and module 2 dealing with the regulations that pertain to any particular piece of property in the city. We concluded some open houses on those topics this summer. We're now moving into module 3, which is the topic of my presentation this evening. I will say that this is a fairly technical presentation, and it's the nature of where we are in this process. We're getting into what are the processes that you follow in order to build in the city. So this is, by its very nature, somewhat complex. We're trying to simplify it, but this is a pretty technical presentation I'm about to give you, just as a warning. To go back to modules 1 and 2 for a moment, these are, in going through the update to modules 1 and 2 in the summer, these are the goals that we organized all of our recommendations around. They include embracing the variety of neighborhoods that we have in the city and ensuring that our new zoning ordinance is reflective of the variety that we have, from relatively urban neighborhoods to suburban ones to somewhat rural ones, and that we should respect that and how this new zoning ordinance is crafted. That we're really aligning the zoning ordinance such that we are directing more dense development to areas where we've got either existing or planned public improvements, that we within the zoning ordinance ensure that we're achieving the outcomes that we're seeking, especially as it relates to housing affordability and how sustainable practices are used in construction, and that finally we're being cognizant of the fact that we've got to manage the growth at the edge of the city. That's modules 1 and 2, just the goals that we organize this new set of regulations around. So now here we are to module 3. Among the things that we heard from the community consistently, we put them in these kind of categories here regarding where we go with the process itself. One, of course, is that we have consistent and predictable decision-making process, and processes that are just easier to understand and are more consistent and predictable than what we have today. We have a quite old zoning ordinance, and it's been amended so many times, hundreds of times since it was originally adopted. And this is our chance to kind of refresh everything and make it more predictable and consistent. That we have better coordination across all of those that touch a development plan in the city. So whether that's multiple city departments or even agencies outside city government, that the process itself contributes to a more cooperative relationship with all these agencies that affect how the city is getting built. So that obviously all city departments, but then other agencies like ACHD or the health department or other people that touch permits and zoning approvals that we share those reviews with. And then that there's clear roles for stakeholders, and I'll reference some of those in here, that we're clear about who makes what decision, when different people or groups that are involved in the approval process, when they're within the process itself, when they see those projects, and clarity around who has what approval authority in the process. So in thinking about how to organize this module 3 and how we're amending the process, we came to these goals here, these 3, that we're reinforcing our desired outcomes. This is a big deal. I've said this multiple times in public meetings. The purpose of this process of updating a zoning ordinance that's now more than 50 years old is not actually to decide how we're going to arrange our arguments. That's not what this process part is about. It's really about how do we get everyone working towards achieving the outcomes that we're seeking in this new ordinance, and align our processes to be supportive of what we're seeking for the city in the new ordinance. Involving the community and partners early in the process, right now it's just kind of across the board in terms of when you might see something. It could be that the first time our partners in the community ever see something, it's kind of done at that point. Or in other cases, it's so conceptual you can barely understand it. But just to be thoughtful about involving people earlier in a concept at a stage where it's understandable, but where it's not completely done, and we can have some influence over its design. And then, of course, that we're thinking through how do we just get better quality out of everything that gets built in the city. So this is a list of things that I'll touch on as I go through here. We raised these up just to make sure that this is kind of a list of things that you'll see within the slides that I'll go through. But one aspect of this is that we're creating these different application types, and I'll go through this in the next slide, including something we're called allowed use in allowed or alternative form. I've got a slide that speaks directly to this as well. Some of this information is going to take a while to kind of review and work through, get that. We had a citizen advisory committee meeting and went through these same slides with them last Thursday. It was a great discussion, very productive. But again, it's going to take a little while for everybody to go through this, and that's understandable. So anyway, we've added this application type, allowed use, allowed form. I'll get into that. Establishing an interdepartmental review group and process to make sure we've got that coordination across departments and other agencies. Reintroducing the hearing examiner, and I'll mention where that is relevant here in a few moments. Changing the design review committee to commission. Part of this is just related to clear roles within the process and trying to be more efficient about how people work through the process, and we can talk about that. And then updating our required development findings, and I'll give you an example of that in these slides. So first, as it relates to this first thing, application type. So we have 4 types here, and this is the slide that kind of outlines those. So types 1 and 2 are administrative approvals. So if you're a type 1 or a type 2, that's done internally, through a staff committee or just through staff in the planning department. And I'll show you a list of what those things are in just a minute. And then type 3 or 4 has some kind of public review. So type 3 would be to the Planning and Zoning Commission, or the Design Review Now Commission, and then type 4 are those things that would need to go to council under any circumstance. So it could be that those go directly to council, but most of them would go to the Planning and Zoning Commission first for a recommendation and then on to City Council. So those are the 4 types. This is the list of the kind of menu items for each type here. So again, 1 and 2 are items that are done administratively. And I'll make a note that highlighted at the bottom is this allowed use, allowed form, which I'll again go through an example of in just a minute. But types 1 and 2 are some kind of administrative review, but that includes, in some cases, an interdepartmental review that we organize and convene, and that happens early in the process. Type 3 and type 4 are those that do have some kind of public hearing associated with them. Again, either P&Z or the Design Review Commission, or of course, certificates of appropriateness, which go to the Historic Preservation Commission. And then type 4, that's the list of things that do need to end up back at City Council. And so in orange, those things that are having a public review are actually not required by state law. Just that's what that highlight is about, just to make sure you see that. So this is the list of types. So again, looking at, this is kind of aligning those different types with the areas of review that they'd have. So administrative ones on top here, which can include that interdepartmental agency review, the addition of a hearing examiner, and I'm not sure, let me look. I guess it would be here. I'm sorry, I'll point out one other thing about this slide here that I did not speak to a moment ago. And you'll see in that kind of gray bar that runs across the screen below the types at the top, you'll see where the appeal is in those cases. So in type 2, if there is an appeal of a decision for one of these type 2 cases, that would go to the hearing examiner. So then you can see, so on appeal to City Council on those type 3s, and then of course, if it gets to City Council, the only appeal beyond City Council is to court. So anyway, this is a significant addition here, obviously, to have to restore the hearing examiner as an appeal authority over some of our cases and some of our types.
Madam Mayor, sorry, just one quick question right on that. So from type 2 administrative reviews, I don't know, say assigned program, it's appealed to the hearing examiner. The hearing examiner makes a finding. Is that then the point of finality, or does
Yes,
it
that's
then go
it.
to council?
No, that's the end.
Great, thank you.
It's just the hearing examiner.
Madam Mayor, since we're stopped here, I had a question on that too. The hearing examiner process is open to public comment.
It is. It is
Okay.
open to public comment.
So I guess the one concern I have in the type 2s is the conditional use permit modification. 99% of them are pretty pro forma, but occasionally we have ones that garnered a lot of interest at City Council. And I just want to make sure that there's an opportunity for the public to comment if they need it.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
So this one here is back to some additions to this process, the interdepartmental agency review, the hearing examiner, and then the design review commission. And what I'll mention here about the design review commission is the way it works right now with the design review committee is that when you appeal an action of that group, it goes to P&Z and then to council. So with the elevation of the design review to the commission, those appeals would go directly to City Council. So just trying to streamline that, because as the process works today, you have times when it's a strictly design issue and it goes to P&Z, and the answer is kind of, well, that's not our purview, we're not a design review board. So taking that out and having it go directly to the City Council is the point of this. And elevating the design review commission, we do want to concentrate on improving their operations and ability to get better designed projects out of their process. And so we have other things we want to do with them, but this elevation to the commission just takes the P&Z out of those appeals.
Madam Mayor. So as we think about these new processes, are there other ways that the planning committee or the planning division has looked at how to streamline applications? I mean, this is one. Are there others that you can quantify about how we're making the process more efficient, more effective, more direct?
Well, I mean, that's very much a part of everything I'm presenting here. I'm talking about adding a hearing, a hearing examiner. One of the big problems is back to it's unpredictable. as to how these processes are going to go, because you have a litany of appeal possibilities.
You,
associated
just to
with-
clarify, you mean currently because of the different routes an application could take?
Yes, if you submit an application today, there's a lot of unpredictability about what's going to happen because there isn't a thought through set of processes associated with the nature of the application. So you can end up getting appealed multiple times over very small things, which you see, and very, very big things. So what we're trying to do today is, what we're trying to do in this process is design something that is commensurate with the different kinds of applications that we're getting. So it's not unpredictable. So you have a consistent process which will allow for greater speed and a consistent speed. That's the most important thing for people, is if they don't know how long it's going to take because there's all this uncertainty with the process, that's the most frustrating thing for people. Can I just have a process that I can count on? And I know that this is what will happen. These are the steps, and this is how long that takes. And so that's what we're trying to get to here, Council Member.
Madam Mayor, thank you. Thank you, Tim. So the other side of that coin is we have members of our community who feel anxious about their ability to give input and express their concerns about how these projects affect their current neighborhoods. So is there anything we can say about these processes that is going to speak to that?
Yes, and I'll maybe just go through the rest of these because we do get to some of that. Shifting to the interdepartmental review, this is something that doesn't occur right now that we think is a big improvement, Council Member, as it relates to the things that people are concerned about in their neighborhoods, which is, do we have better coordination among all the agencies that need to review these things? Because right now, there's these pre-application meetings, but those are really just telling an applicant what their process will look like. It's not any kind of collaboration across agencies to say, are we addressing all these issues, whether it's a transportation related issue or a public works issue or the whole litany of things, trees, landscape. Part of to getting to your issue that we heard a lot about is we have to have better coordination early on to ensure the things that we care about in our neighborhood are being addressed in the process. So this is an addition that speaks to that. And I'm going to come back to your question, Councilmember Sanchez, in a minute, because I have another slide related to that, but I want to talk about this allowed use, allowed form for just a minute. So this is the notion that this gets back to ensuring that our processes are helping us achieve our desired outcomes in this ordinance. And so, for instance, I'm going to use a specific case here, but we have within these mixed use zones instances where you are an allowed use and you're also an allowed form versus an alternative form. So the one that's probably the simplest to speak about is the MX3, which is along a few corridors like State Street, Vista, Fairview, where we're seeking to get denser, transit-oriented, more pedestrian-designed buildings and neighborhoods. And so in a place like that, we want to make such things, denser, pedestrian design, transit-oriented projects, easier to achieve. So that's called allowed use, allowed form. If you're in an MX3 and you have an allowed use, so you're doing an office building or office and retail or even residential and retail, but you're not doing it in the form that we want. So you could have a single story or two-story building with surface parking or something like that, which isn't the preferred form, then it's an alternative form. So it's a type 3. So that does go to a hearing. And I got an example of that. It's not the greatest example, but here, this is an MX3 zone. So an example of this condition here, where on the left, you have a allowed use, allowed form that we're seeking in an MX3 zone. So, okay, you're a type 2, you can proceed. On the right, you have something that's in an MX3 that isn't the preferred form. So that is a type 3 and requires a hearing. So the image on the right is generous. The concern is really around on these MX3 zones, which are not the whole city. We're talking about, some pretty precise application of MX3 where we have our best bus service, where we expect bus service to get much better and even other forms of transit to come online. We really want to achieve that denser pedestrian designed format. The concern is, again, where you get there, a single story, 2-story, very suburban, surface parked, that's not good in an MX3. So that's an alternative form. Even though it's an allowed use, it's an alternative form. So we really want to look at that. So that applies to all these MX3 zones. This is a format to the new ordinance that we really wanted to incorporate to address this issue of, let's have our process help us with the outcomes that we're seeking.
Madam Mayor, a quick question, observation. If you've got allowed use and allowed form, and it's going to move through the process efficiently, and then you've got another parallel application that has allowed use alternative form that's going to go get this additional
Right.
review, do we anticipate mechanisms in place to limit the scope of the review to that one question, the one that pulled it out of the streamlined process? So we're only going to be looking at, the one factor that made this alternative form, or the observation is there's a risk there that additional review or hearing process, depending on the nature of it, could accidentally turn something that was 90% going to sail through into a protracted administrative process.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, directly to the question, we'll have to write the standards by which those reviews would occur. So it's precise as to what has prompted this public, meeting. So you can go down the list. Okay, it's for these reasons that we're reviewing this. But I do want to say that we feel strongly that we want to achieve the desired form. You know what I mean? So we have to be precise about an alternative form review at planning and zoning, for instance. But we're proposing this step because of the importance, we think, of achieving the desired form.
I guess the concern or the thought that I had was, you can imagine a scenario where you're right, the photo is generous, but the desired form is on the left, the project comes in on the right, and then the hearing examiner or whatever board or body hears it gets public testimony that what is on the right is too big in scale.
Yeah, right. Speaking to things that aren't really relevant.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. And we have that concern always, as you know, and in this case would have to write some standards for what that review would be. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Mayor. Tim, sort of along these same lines, I know that subdivisions are required to come to city council, if I'm not mistaken, by La Lupa. However, if we have a subdivision, we're going to establish some maybe higher density standards, frankly, in our residential zones than what we've had previously. We've traditionally seen those subdivisions come in those residential zones much below the allowed maximum density. Is there going to be anything in the review process that would make it easier for a subdivision to make it through the process if it were actually meeting the allowed density, or within a certain percentage of it rather than below it like we typically see?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, council member. We have not talked about that yet.
Okay.
I think though we expect to get lots of good ideas through this public process to consider what other additions should be made that are in the spirit of the way we're organizing this.
Well, that's one I would encourage.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to give you an example of some of the background into the findings, because we're going through all the findings to make amendments there to, again, be consistent with the overall goals of the new ordinance. So this is just one example, and this may be kind of subtle to some, but that currently an example, the traffic impact is minimized is the way this thing is described. We're saying we're going to minimize traffic. What we're proposing is that the site provides a safe, convenient, and efficient network that promotes other ways of getting around active transportation. So the reason for showing you this is there's this real vetting of all these findings throughout the ordinance to kind of align them with the new thinking. Again, back to, this is an ordinance that dates to 1966. At the core of it was everybody will drive and everything will be separated from each other. And so now we have this situation where we're trying to promote alternative ways of getting around. We're actually trying to mix things together. So all these findings have to be scrubbed, so to speak, to kind of update them to the expectations that we now have. So existing process versus council process, and Councilmember Sanchez, this kind of gets back to your question in a way, and that is the neighborhood involvement and so forth, which, we are committed to having neighborhoods involved in satisfying ways that, again, are predictable. And it's a little bit across all over the place right now. And so on top here, you see a pre-application meeting, which again is just a staff meeting, but whatever the concept is that we're reviewing in a pre-application could run the gamut from, it's at almost 0%, it's a sketch on a piece of paper, to pretty much all designed, and then you go to a neighborhood meeting. So in this new process we're proposing, and again, we talked with the CAC about this last week, and we'll continue to talk about it with developers and the community as we go through this process in module 3. But the idea is that you come in with a consistently conceptual design that meets certain standards that we can review, and then go to the neighborhood meeting, then come back to city staff again for a meeting and for us to convene the interdepartmental review committee. So you've got the neighborhood feedback, you've got across the board staff and other agency feedback before you go to them submitting an application, which is, it just doesn't work like that now. You're getting applications that aren't even well thought through or have gotten no feedback, when the application occurs. So it's trying to be very intentional about a process where you can work through these issues with neighborhoods at a point in the process where it's not too late, but it's not too early. So, you can see something that you can understand, but it's not all baked at that point. And then get that multi-agency review such that the application that is submitted reflects all this impact, all this, feedback from neighborhoods and all the city staff that should be reviewing this. And then one other thing is we've been working on a tool that would allow people better access to what's going on, again, to this issue of people and neighborhoods knowing exactly what's going on their street or their neighborhood. Is this new tool that we will launch in conjunction with the new ordinance that allows you to really see what's happening, and then other things in association with where that neighborhood meeting sits in the process and how that's again a satisfying, meaningful interaction between the neighborhood and the developer or applicant, and ways to do that. So earlier neighborhood meeting, as I said, requiring a summary to be submitted for the neighborhood through the city, and then having this online tool for people to stay up to date on what's happening within their community. And then I'll finish with where we're headed now. So we've got a series of 5 public meetings coming up on module 3. One of those will be entirely online, but starting on October 13th at Timberline High School, we'll have a series of meetings on this. As I said earlier, this is a lot of information to go through and try to understand. Like we have at the previous meetings, particularly over the summer, we'll have a very kind of interactive event with people. So there'll be lots of additional explanations of this information. We will have a brief presentation. We'll have Q&A as we have before, but we'll also have much more information set up for people to try to work through this. I'll remind you too, and I'm not sure if I have this now, The good news is we still have time to work on this. We're tracking towards an approval next year as we'd always been planning, but we'll go through these public meetings. We'll get feedback on module 3. We'll work on a final kind of consolidated draft that will include ideas we got about modules 1 and 2 and 3, and then be able to submit that for official approval process early next year so that it can get through required public hearings and get through P&Z to city council. So, this is a lot of information to take in. It will require some studying, but we have time and we'll now be in a month or even more of public meetings for people to learn more about it and bring us the concerns they have about it. So that's where we are, and we'll get started with public meetings here soon. So we had the CAC meeting, wanted to report to you on this, and then go out to the public for these meetings.
Madam Mayor. Tim, thanks for the presentation. A couple slides back, there's kind of a view of like 2 processes. The current one that we've got, that's the one. So I think that I don't think that any of the city council want to just like fast track every single development proposal that comes through, but we do want to make sure that like proposals are getting through, good ones are getting through quickly, and solving the needs and the problems that our city is facing. So if I'm looking at this, I see one that like has a lot fewer steps than the other one that has a lot more steps. But I think what you're telling me is that the process gets hung up maybe at the last 2, because the community hasn't had a chance to weigh in. They come in full force, maybe really upset about a project. It potentially gets appealed at that point, or council or planning and zoning adds complications into it that makes it even more challenging. So even though there's more steps in the bottom process, the hope is a lot of those problems are worked out early on. There's less appeals, and some of the concerns that council or planning and zoning might have will already be addressed to kind of shorten that process. Is that a accurate?
You described it well, council member. I would just go back to this issue of it's not predictable right now. I think one of this isn't about the speed of this. The one on the top and the one on the bottom, they could be the same amount of time, or the one on the bottom could be slightly less. It all has to do with, do I know how much time I'm talking about? And can I count on that? And so a lot of the improvement associated with this goes back to the overall structure of the thing, the 4 types, what agencies review each of the types, where do the appeals go? So there's a streamlining, and I don't mean streamlining such that we're helping people get through with projects that we don't want. It's all organized around what do we want, and then how do we create a process that's predictable and streamlined for what we want. But I think the way you described it, council member, is really good too, because right now you could get in really fast, but then it takes so much longer at the end because there's not consensus or even knowledge necessarily of what's going on. So it gets bogged down later, which is a lot of the frustration for people that are trying to do good things.
Cool. Thank you.
Couple of things. So one thing I just want to clarify, as we talked about the various types of review, non-conforming use was in there, but then a major non-conforming use was in 3. So I'm assuming what's listed in type 2 is a de minimis non-conforming use. Is it the criteria for that less than 50%, or will we have some criteria on that?
Does anybody know what that? Yeah. Andrea, you want to speak to
that? Good afternoon, Mayor, Council Member Clegg. So the type 2 non-conforming use would be establishing a non-conforming use. So you proving that you are a non-conforming use. When we talk about those type 3 or level 3 applications, those are actually expansions of non-conforming uses.
So any expansion?
Yeah, and the differing number would be 20%. So you're allowed to go up. You can expand that up to 20% at the staff level, or you're going to require that elevated review if you're going above that 20% threshold.
Got it. Okay, thank you. That's helpful. On the interdepartmental review, it occurs to me that some of our departments have some pretty specific standards, say fire, for instance, and response time. And others are maybe not as far along. And I don't want to hold this up for that, but I'm thinking, for instance, a 10-minute walk to a park. Are we going to review when we do those things? Are we going to review, is there a park within a 10-minute walking distance of this? Do you have to cross an arterial to get to it? Those kinds of things so that we can clearly identify where the holes are in the community and begin working toward filling them, however it is we fill them.
Councilmember, it's a good point. I think the expectation was that this interdepartmental group would be reviewing, though, while they could make note of issues of concern associated with any individual project, that really what they were doing was coordinating around requirements that they have. So in that case, an issue around park availability within a proximity of the site would be interesting and noteworthy, but it wouldn't slow them down.
Right.
It would be, let's make a note of that, but that's a part of a bigger planning issue. This would really be just related to the technical requirements that we're expecting of that applicant. Yeah.
Okay, I thought that was probably it, but it would be good to have somewhere in the process to make sure we make note of those so that we as policymakers can respond to those on a bigger basis in the policy realm. Under the interdepartmental review, unlike some cities, we won't get to do that with our road department. And I wonder if there are things, again, I don't want to slow this down, that we've thought of that we could make some agreements with ACHD in terms of the kind of review we get from them and the things we expect. You mentioned the TIS and whether or not we should require one. I'm becoming more and more of the mind that in a built city like we are, it really doesn't do much good. That the review that does good is what's the network look like? Where are the connections? Are there crossings on the major road? We're not going to widen our roads because we added a 200-unit apartment, for instance, right? So just wondering what, if anything, we've thought of in terms of working with ACHD specifically, but also VRT, for instance, on identifying the things we really need to review in these and working on the others in the policy realm.
It's a council member. It's a very good point and one of great discussion among our team that we need in conjunction with this, an update to our policies as relates to ACHD and others regarding expectations around transportation and getting into traffic impact studies and, what we're trying to achieve through this zoning rewrite and how we're applying these zoning districts and how that's very different than the way we've thought about analyzing traffic in the past. So yes, that is among the things really that we see this group that's reviewing things as a very important part of this. And one of their tasks would be to identify where are those conflicts with these other agencies and can we update those policies? Mm.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah.
Thank you. Tim, I really appreciate that, letting us know about that new process. I think it's been a source of frustration for a lot of members of our community and for those of us who joined the city council and we're not familiar with any of these processes. And I think sometimes when you don't know, you see things maybe other folks don't see because they've been in this world for a while. And that was one of those common sense questions that I had many years ago, like, why are all these different groups not sitting down together and talking?
Yes.
And so thank you for doing that. I think some of those partner agencies that are pretty familiar and commonplace, like ACHD and such, you mentioned other partners. Can you give us examples of other groups that we could look forward to participating in that part of the process?
You wanna?
Mayor, Councilmember Sanchez. Yes, the interdepartmental review will focus on internal, so it could be anything from fire, public works, those individuals. But when we look out at our outside agencies, it could be irrigation districts, it could be our public utility providers. It could be a number of those individuals that could be impacted, or even school districts, to make sure that not only are we planning our growth, but we're aligning our plans for growth.
Director King, can you give us a sense of how this new process compares to other cities' process of our similar size? Because we're kind of an outlier here in Idaho. So talk to us about what this looks like in a city in another state, and how does it compare?
Well, I think cities across this country are all in this state of trying to update zoning ordinances that date to the 60s, 70s, 80s. Everybody adopted ordinances at that time. So everybody's working through how do we create new ordinances and what are the processes that we create in conjunction with that. I will tell you this module 3 part is the one that's been the most frustrating for cities, because while there's been a lot of discussion around the zoning part, like what do we zone property and what are people's rights to build, there's been a lot of progress, you could say, on that topic. Where there's been less progress is on the process that people follow, and a lot of frustration around that. So my first answer, council member, is that I think we're actually looking at this in creative ways that others will follow, honestly. But my second part of the answer is this interdepartmental review agency piece is something that in cities where processes you're getting better outcomes, such committees exist. And so it's a little unusual for a city of this size to not have such a thing. And so Boise's kind of been going along without it for quite, forever, I guess. And so I think that addition, when you look at other cities, council member, is one that will achieve really helpful results for us. And that's been the experience in other cities.
Madam Mayor, one more, please. So Tim, I'm thinking about something I recently saw. I don't know if it was something we did at the airport where we had this mock emergency, where we had volunteers coming forward, acting as victims of, an emergency situation, a hazardous situation. Is there a plan to test the system? Are we going to have like a case study, folks who give it a whirl, see where it works, where it needs to be tweaked, that sort of thing?
Yes, council member, thank you. We're actually working on those case studies now for both denser places like MX3 along those corridors, as well as neighborhoods, and how do the regulations work today and how would they work under the new ordinance? So we're working on them now.
Thank you, Tim. I'm really hoping you test that interdepartmental, outer departmental review part of the process. I'm really curious to see how that works.
All right, was this your last slide?
Yeah, Mayor.
You've got-
Could I ask just one quick question on timing? After these upcoming meetings, you'll be finalizing the language. I assume there will be a time when we'll have a chance to actually look at the language before it gets finalized for Planning and Zoning Commission.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
You'll have plenty
okay.
of time to do that. And Mayor, I'll just finish by, and I make note of this because when I arrived here, there was a lot of frustration on the CAC in particular around the status of this project. And some of it related, I think, to staff's role in these regulations. And I just wanted to make note, everybody's here, of course, that's working on this. Jessica, not everybody, but Jessica Zelag's team in planning, which includes Deanna and Lena and Andrea, and then Lindsay, of course, from CE, who's really been helping with all the public outreach. And they have really taken ownership of this, and it's been greatly appreciated by the entire community, but most recently by the CAC when we met last week. This feeling that, hey, this is ours now, and we can really keep working on this, and but a feeling of much more satisfaction because of the work of this group of people who have really dug in and are seeking to do something extraordinary. So I just wanted to make note of their hard work and ingenuity. So thank you.
We should have a dinner for them or something at the end.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for the update. And yes, thanks to the team. I've had great feedback from members of CAC from all walks of life on where this is headed, the reflection and updates that were made after modules 1 and 2, and really appreciate the work of the whole city team that's helping to get this done. Thanks.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
I move we go into executive session, personnel, land acquisition records exempt from public disclosure, pending probable litigation, communicate with risk management regarding pending probable claims, labor contract, Idaho Code 742061B C D F I N J.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Willetts,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
Thanks. We will be back at 6.